Hi guys, welcome back to the Home and Homestead. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm Rebecca. And if not, thanks for joining me again. Today we'll be doing some food preservation of tomatoes. We'll do some water bath canning of Salsa Roja. It's a mild salsa and it uses some fresh tomatoes with ancho peppers. So we'll be doing a number of tomato preservation recipes using both fresh and frozen tomatoes, and today will be one of the fresh tomato recipes. So let's head to the kitchen and make some salsa roja. And the recipe that I'll be using today is inspired by the salsa roja recipe in the all new book of canning and preserving on page 166. So in order to prepare some of our first ingredients for this homemade salsa recipe, first we needed to roast some tomatoes and onions and potentially garlic. And we'll be doing it 10 times the recipe that you can find in the all new book of canning and food preservation. So what I did was I took 12.5 pounds of Roma tomatoes and I cored them and put them on a baking pan with the skin side down, and then I also peeled and quartered about 10 small onions and placed them on the baking pan, and I baked them at 425 degrees for about 25 minutes, and that gave the tomatoes and onions a chance to soften and slightly char. Then I took them out of the oven and let them cool on some cooling racks, and as soon as I was able to touch the tomatoes, I peeled the skins off, and that worked really nicely to give a little depth of flavor to the tomatoes and onions, and it also made the peels really easy to be removed from the tomatoes. If you watched any of my videos on using frozen tomatoes, you'll see how easy those tomatoes are to peel as well. Now, if you're going to use whole garlic cloves, you can also take those whole garlic cloves and put them in a little aluminum foil pouch and stick them on the corner of that baking pan for when you roast the tomatoes and onions, and that'll give that garlic a little extra flavor as well. If you're using the pre-minced garlic like I will be using today, you don't need to do that step. So for this recipe, doing 10 times quantity, you needed 60 cloves of garlic. If you're using a pre-minced garlic, you'd use about 2/3 a cup. So now, since our onions and tomatoes are all prepped and I'm using pre-minced garlic, we can move on to preparing our ancho chili peppers. So here I have a pan on the cooktop, and I'm heating it up so it's nice and warm, and I have my jar of dried ancho peppers. The original recipe called for 6 ancho peppers per batch, so I should use 60 ancho peppers. So once this pan is nice and hot, we're just going to simply put the dried peppers onto the pan. To heat them up a little bit. What this is going to do is help deepen the flavor of the peppers, and they'll kind of puff up a little bit and maybe even blister a little bit. You don't want them to be on the pan too long and burn, because then they'll give off a bitter flavor. So here I have 8 on the pan. It's still kind of heating up a little bit. Once we get this process going and the pan is nice and hot, you'll only have them on the pan about 10 seconds on each side. Then you'll flip them, they'll kind of puff up a little bit, and then I'm going to stick them into this large bowl. Let's prepare our dried ancho peppers. Alright, so the pan has heated up and they started to kind of puff up a little bit. You almost hear a little creaking sound in each of the peppers, because the pan is finally nice and hot. Little crackling type of sound you hear. That's as the skin stretches out and they puff up a little bit. We'll just do about 10 seconds aside, and I'll put them into a bowl. We'll add some more. Get 10 on here. So dried ancho peppers you can either get from the grocery store or perhaps a Mexican grocer, or you can grow your own ancho peppers and then dehydrate them. You can also pick them up from farmers markets and other specialty grocery stores, so pretty readily available. Open this one up. If you can see, it's kind of puffing up here. Do you see this one especially? And this one as well. So we'll flip them over. This one is starting to blister a little bit there. That's what you want to see. Kind of waking up the dried peppers and getting some of their oils to release a little bit. Let them sit on this side. See this one inflating here? All right, get these into the bowl. And let's get another batch. So I'll continue to prep these peppers. Since we're doing 10 times the recipe, this will call for about 60 ancho chili peppers. So once I finish this pan, we'll be halfway there. All right, so we have our bowl full of the ancho peppers that I just heated up, and they kind of puffed up a little bit and blistered, and they're cool enough that I can touch them. So now what we're going to do is just take a kitchen shear and just cut the stems off and remove the inner membrane and the seeds. I'm actually going to put the peppers onto this surface here so I can put the prepared ones back into the bowl. All right, so we have all 60 of the peppers, stems, membranes, and most of the seeds removed. So I'm going to just dump them onto the surface here. Now we're going to take the kitchen shears again and just snip the peppers into nice sized pieces. You can also just tear it by hand, but I really find that the kitchen shears works the best. Okay, so we have our ancho peppers all prepared and ready for the next step. So I've been boiling some water in my electric kettles. I have about 3 to 4 quarts of water that's been boiling here. We just want to add enough to cover all of the peppers. I have them in a 16-quart stainless steel bowl here. So a nice big bowl. That should do the trick. So we'll just dunk all of the pieces of pepper into this boiling water. We're just going to let them sit for about 20 minutes to a half hour until they're nice and soft and rehydrated. There. So we'll let these sit for about 20 to 30 minutes. Alright, so as the peppers continue to soak, we can move on to getting the rest of the ingredients ready. They're just about finished soaking. So what I have here is an 18-quart Nesco roaster oven. And again, we're doing a 10 times the recipe that is found in the cookbook that I referenced earlier. And I have already prepared the tomatoes and onions. So I have 12.5 pounds of Roma tomatoes that I had roasted in the oven at 425 degrees for about 25 minutes with about 10 small onions. And then I sent this through my food processor to make a nice smooth tomato sauce. It ends up being about 6.5 quarts of prepared tomato sauce, but that all just depends on how juicy your tomatoes are that particular year. So I'm going to add the tomatoes to our roaster oven. if you were to prepare the tomatoes today with your recipe, you would just roast them, allow them to cool completely, remove the peels, and send them through your food processor. And here I have the onions that I had roasted with the tomatoes. So I'll place them in there. And the onions have a nice light char to them, and they're nice and soft and have a kind of caramelized sweet smell to them. Since I'm using pre-minced garlic, this is 2/3 a cup of garlic. If you were to do fresh garlic cloves, you do about 60 cloves of garlic. You put them into a little aluminum foil pouch and stick them on the pan with the onions and tomatoes when you're roasting them. And finally, I have 2.5 cups of lime juice. And this is the lime juice that I use. Now let's just mix these ingredients together in here. Bring the peppers over. These have been soaking for about a half hour. So they're nice and soft. I'm just going to use a hand strainer and move this over to the roaster oven. We're actually going to reserve the soaking liquid because once we get all the peppers in here, we may need to use some of this liquid to get the consistency of the salsa that we would like. Alrighty, let's mix these ancho peppers in. So we have roasted tomatoes, onions, garlic, lime juice, and ancho peppers in here. Now that you have this mixture created, we're going to puree it. So you can do it a number of different ways. You can take it in batches and pulse it in your blender or food processor, or what I'm going to do today is use my high-powered immersion blender and try to get a nice consistency for our salsa here. This has a nice, rich, dark reddish brown color. It's really beautiful. I'm gonna add just a little bit of that cooking liquid here. Let's mix it in. Alright, so now that we have the consistency of the salsa that we like, let's give this a taste. So we haven't added any salt or pepper yet. So it has a nice sweet and kind of smoky flavor to it. So I'm going to start with 2 teaspoons of canning salt and 1 teaspoon of ground black pepper. I'm going to turn the Nesco roaster up to 250 degrees. I'm going to stir the salt and pepper in. We're going to heat this up and bring it to a boil. In the meantime, I'll get my water bath canner heated up so it's ready for our jars. And I'll get our jars prepared and heated up as well so that they'll be ready for this hot salsa to go in there. All right. Another quick taste. Another teaspoon. So that's 3 teaspoons of canning salt and 1 teaspoon of ground black pepper. All right, let me get the lid. We'll bring this up to a boil. All right, so our salsa roja has been slowly simmering. It came up to a gentle boil and it's been simmering. It took about an hour and a half. So you want to do this kind of slowly so that the tomato sauce has a chance to thoroughly cook through and thicken, and it has evaporated some of that liquid. It's a nice dark reddish color, and it's a sweet and slightly smoky flavor. So now what we're going to do is get this into our warmed canning jars. I have pint jars and half pint jars. So I have my canning ladle here. We're going to fill it to a 1/2 inch headspace. So you can use your headspace measuring tool, or to about halfway up the threads. And the reason I'm doing pint jars and half pint jars is I like having a variety of sizes. The pint jars work really nicely just to keep in the refrigerator for your salsa, and it also works nicely for a lot of Mexican style recipes. It's a great base for a lot of sauces. So here's the headspace measuring tool I talked about. On one end it has the headspace 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, and 1 inch. So we'll go down to a 1/2 inch. You can see that's where we're at. Now on the other end is a bubble removal tool. So you just stick that into whatever you're canning. I just like to slowly put it to the edges of what I've canned, as well as in the middle. That just helps remove any air bubbles that may have formed while you were pouring into these canning jars. Now I have a wet paper towel. I'm just going to wipe the rim and the side threads. Help get any food particles that may have landed on there. Wiping off the rim helps to ensure a nice tight seal. And I like to wipe around the threads as well because it helps to keep your ring a little cleaner. Because you can reuse your ring over and over again for canning projects. And if the rings stay nice and clean, it's less likely that they will rust. So now I'll just get the lid followed by the ring, just finger tight. The ring is just holding the lid on while it's being processed. And once it's processed and cools, the lid will suction down and seal, and this ring can be removed after 12 to 24 hours. So I have my water bath canner all prepped and ready to go. So I'll get these pint jars into there and process for 25 minutes. All right, so let's get these jars into the canner. Temperature's good. So I have the canner filled with water, and it's nicely heated and boiling. And I have a jar rack on the bottom so that the jars can sit on there and they're not sitting directly on the bottom of your canner. There we go. So we have 10 pint jars in there. They're covered with a couple inches of water, boiling nicely, so I'll put the lid back on. And these will process for 25 minutes, and that's all based on your altitude. That's the minimum processing time. What I mean by that is based on your altitude or elevation where you live, you may need to adjust the processing time. So if you live at the altitude in feet from the left column, you'll need to increase the processing time of 25 minutes by the number of minutes in the right column. That's just something to be mindful of whenever you're canning. So we'll let these jars process, and we'll come back for the next step. Now while those pint jars are processing, let's fill some half pint jars. I like to do the half pint jar size as well. This is a really nice size to just bring if you're going somewhere to share. Maybe if you're having a little get together, you can put out a couple different flavors of salsa that you made. And the half pint works out just great. So again, we're filling to a 1/2 inch headspace, which goes to about halfway up the threads of the canning jar. And if you're not comfortable with eyeballing it, you can use the headspace measuring tool. Now let's remove the air bubbles again. So on the other end of the headspace measuring tool is the air bubble removing tool. Just slowly press it along the edges. Down the middle. All right, the 25-minute processing time has finished, so I will remove the lid. And we'll let them sit in the canner for about 5 minutes, then we can move them to the cooling and sealing area and get the 1/2 pint jars into here as well. Now let's get the 1/2 pint jars into here. We have 9 1/2 pint jars. We'll let these process for 25 minutes as well. All right, the 1/2 pint jars have finished processing, so I'll turn the canner off, remove the lid, and I'll let them sit in here for about 5 minutes, and I'll add them over with the pint jars in the cooling and sealing area. All right, guys, here you have it. We have 10 pint jars and 9 1/2 pint jars of our Salsa Roja. This is a really delicious sweet and slightly smoky salsa, and it works really nicely for Mexican style dishes as kind of an additive or a sauce base. So I'm looking forward to using this for dipping tortilla chips and for various Mexican style meals. For today's food preservation recipe, we did a water bath canning with fresh tomatoes. Keep watching for more inspiration and ideas for both fresh and frozen tomato food preservation videos. And I also go over how to dehydrate tomatoes for making a tomato powder, which would be great for a tomato paste substitute. If you're new to the channel or haven't done so yet, I would really appreciate you subscribing, and be sure to check out some other videos I have, both on food preservation, recipes in the kitchen, as well as home decor and organization. And I'd also appreciate that any other videos you check out and you enjoy, please give them a thumbs up. I hope you're having a fantastic day. See you next time. Take care.